The bishop and martyr Saint Andrew of Crete in 740, we're almost done, folks, wrote a hymn to Mary, calling her alone holy without stain. To Latin Western ears, influenced by St. Augustine and his theology, this sounded like conceived without stain. An immaculate conception. But Andrew of Crete didn't mean that. He was from the Greek East. And the Greek East never had Pelagius, and therefore they never needed an Augustine to develop a theology of original sin. And that is why, my friends, that Eastern Christians don't have original sin in their understanding. They have a completely different understanding of the fall. Not totally unrelated, but different. So he was an Easterner, and to Eastern ears, under Eastern theological influence, having a different understanding of the fall, alone holy without stain meant only freedom from mortality and general human weakness. Faith in Mary's power of intercession with God received a strong push from the growing belief in her Assumption. During the Middle Ages, a lot of plagues would come through. People felt as we became more and more Germanic and feudal, we began to look more and more at God the Father like Jehovah the Hutt. Somebody wrathful that we can do nothing but piss off. But thankfully, Jesus paid our debt, right? But now we're eternally indebted to Jesus. So you can't win in this system. Jesus is terrible, and he's going to come any day and bring the plagues because of our many sins. And that must be why we are dying all the time, with the bubonic plague and everything going through. But there was somebody we could go to in this very harsh, masculine spirituality. We could go to Mary. Mary stood in the gap, you see, as the mother of mercy, our life, our sweetness, and our hope. We could appeal to her to kind of get us in underneath God's wrath, hidden in her mantle. It was Saint Germanus, who died in 733, the Patriarch of Constantinople, who popularized the view that Mary had a maternal influence over God, and that she could turn away God's anger and vengeance. She was seen as our mediatrix with God. Sound familiar? Thus, by the beginning of the 8th century, Mary's intercession and her importance for salvation had become well-established truths, most especially in the East, both through popular literature and through preaching. The main contribution of the West at this time was where it had been worked out by Ambrose and Augustine, was the close association of Mary with the Church. You notice here, you're being born in Mary, in the church, in the baptismal font, and Christ is being born in you. She's covered in red in these old icons. That's the Holy Spirit. The 3 stars, one on top of her head and the shoulders, refers to her being virgin before the birth, during the birth, and after the birth. Notice in that iconology, she's not associated with the woman in Revelation. You'll see other images of Mary where she's got the 12 stars and she's caught up. Actually, that originally was the Greek goddess Dike in the book of Revelation. That's actually the goddess of justice, or Zadik, righteousness, in Israelite sky lore. But then we had thought of that image as it had been recontextualized and caught up in the Mariology. The book of Revelation's woman in Revelation chapter 12 had been thought of as Mary, even though this woman is gigantic and can stand on the moon. I love Mary, don't get me wrong, but I don't think Mary's big enough to stand on the moon and wear the sun as her clothing. She'd have to be a constellation to be that big. And she is, Virgo. That's Scorpio underneath. But the main contribution in the West was this understanding as Mary and church together. They're the same. Symbolic connection. But compared to Eastern doctrine and devotion, the West's Marian approach was sober and restrained. The West had not yet come in touch with the East's Theophilus legend, which would so profoundly influence Mariology in the Middle Ages, and I'm going to close with that tonight. Middle Ages. The idea that Mary appeases the wrath of God, the stern judge, had been expressed by Germanus in the 8th century in the East. It became one of the popular themes of medieval Marian piety and devotion. Her power to save us was proclaimed even more dramatically in this legend of Theophilus, which was translated into Latin by Paul the Deacon in around 799 CE, a monk of Monte Cassino who had spent 4 years at the court of Charlemagne. Paul's version familiarized Western Christians with the story of the man who, like Dr. Faustus, gives his soul over to the devil in order to get a desired post. Afterward, he repents and asks Mary to obtain forgiveness for his terrible sin. She does, and the devil is forced to yield control. Through the spreading of this story, ladies and gentlemen, Mary is seen in the West now, as in the East, as the redemptrix of captives, as refuge of sinners, as mediatrix between God and humankind. The legend was reproduced even by serious theologians and made the subject of a play in which Christ is portrayed as a menacing judge whose heart is softened only by the pleas of his mother. She also became known at that time as the Star of the Sea, who guides us safely into heaven's port, and as the Mother of Mercy. And that's it for tonight, folks. What do you think about all this?